3, 2, 1. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are, and you still have the boredom to watch my shows. Welcome again to the Freedom Alternative. I'm once again with Adam Starzyński.
It's a pleasure to be here again.
And it's been, what, 7, 8 months, something like that? Since
even 10, I think.
Yeah, it was last November after the Independence March,
That's
the
right.
centennial. Mm-hmm. So now we're on, well, you're going to watch this, I don't know, August 15 or something like that, but when we're taping is August the 2nd, one day after another big event.
Very big.
Occurred in Warsaw. So yeah, let's dive in straight into that first, and then we'll carry on for whatever time we'll have.
Of course. It's nice that you always appear for our big holidays.
There might be a coincidence somewhere.
But yeah, of course, yesterday we had the 75th anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising, which broke out on August 1st, 1944, when we had our dear friends, the Russians, very close by Warsaw. But the
just
city
watching.
Just watching. But initially, what is also interesting is that Radio Moscow was broadcasting to the Poles and asking them to rise up against the Germans. But just 2-3 days after the Poles rose up, the British they asked Stalin that they would like to land their planes on Russian-controlled territory to be able to drop some supplies over Warsaw. And then Stalin said famously that he doesn't want to have anything to do with the crazy adventure or something of the sort in Warsaw. So as you can see, the Russians, they can change their narrative very quickly if they believe that it benefits them.
Yeah, they've been doing that for at the very least the last 150 years, probably even more than that. I mean, it's not a communist thing, it's a Russian thing. It's been going on.
Yes, when it comes to their attitude to truth and falsehood, they are very pragmatic when it comes to those things.
They have their own definition even of the word pragmatic. That's why, it's a Jordan Petersonian approach is very useful, because it depends on what you mean by pragmatic, what normal people mean or what the Russians mean. Right. We were discussing before we started recording that this particular march that you're now watching footage from was seized upon by what we would generally call the left to spread their own version of the truth.
Oh yes. We have a quite interesting case here in Warsaw. We had local elections last fall, I think, if I remember correctly. And the candidate who won, Rafał Trzaskowski, and became the mayor of the city, is a liberal of the Civic Platform Party that used to rule Poland before the Law and Justice Party came to government. But he also belongs to the leftist wing of it. You could say that he's some kind of Polish Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris.
I think
something
Kamala
of the
Harris
sort.
would be a more fair comparison, especially in terms of attitude.
So, for example, what has it been, maybe 2 years ago, we had this, what we called the attempted putsch against the Polish government. It was a conflict really over a very, very stupid procedural matter in the parliament, but the opposition claimed that something hadn't been done according to the rules, and they occupied the parliament for 2 or 3 weeks over the Christmas holiday and New Year's and so on. And there was a very interesting divide in the opposition between, I think they called them in Polish, the młode wilki, the young wolves, which was the younger generation of politicians from the Civic Platform Party.
Who tend to be even further to the left.
Further to the left, and they also have strong personal ambitions. They really want to be in the camera light.
Of course, there's the hunger for the big pot of shekels.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now this is a bit of a problem for the Civic Platform Party, just as I guess these progressive forces are for the Democratic Party, because they have this tendency to go a little far to the left for the mainstream voter. So now we will have elections here in Poland probably by the beginning of October, by the latest by early November. And it's a big game when it comes to forming coalitions right now. And the Civic Platform Party have been advocating for one grand coalition against the Law and Justice Party. It's probably their only way of defeating the Law and Justice Party. But since they have been drifting to the left, this agrarian party, the Polish People's Party, that used to be a supportive party of the Polish Communist Party during communism, but their base is agrarian, so conservative people. So because of this drift to the left, this agrarian party, the Polish People's Party...
On the cultural left.
Yes. The Polish People's Party, they said that, sorry, no coalition. So judging by it, we can be, I would say, 85-90% sure that the Law and Justice Party will win the elections and will most likely be able to continue to govern on their own without having to look for a coalition partner.
So we're looking at another 4 years of Mateusz Morawiecki.
That is very likely, and of course it took a while for Viktor Orban before he could really cement the changes in Hungary. Of course, he had a constitutional majority from the start, which
tends to help.
tends to help. We haven't, but still another 4 years. I mean, despite the fact that they had this single majority for the last 4 years, Polish, the cultural scene, all the oligarchs in Poland, they all still tend to favor the Civic Platform Party. So the Law and Justice Party doesn't have that control over Poland that Viktor Orban has over Hungary. Hopefully, after 4 years, this will begin to change.
Yes, because if one reads the I want to avoid to say Die Lügenpresse, but I guess I have to say Die Lügenpresse because most of the bad news about Poland in English are by German-controlled press.
That is usually the case.
That's just the fact. Or sometimes Russian-controlled. I'm looking at you, The Independent. Very independent. Just happens to be owned by a KGB operative, but you know, it's very independent. It's independent of the truth, for sure. But if one reads the English language press about Poland, you'll hear that, oh, they have LGBT-free areas in Poland. They don't. Or that, oh my God, one is being oppressed in... But in reality, the cultural control in Poland is, okay, slightly more conservative than Germany, but that's not a big standard. I mean, almost anyone in Europe is slightly more conservative than Germany and Sweden. I mean, it's just the way it is. So, you know, the cultural revolution is still nowhere near.
Yes, we were also talking about this earlier, that Viktor Orban initially also didn't fight the cultural war that much in Hungary. I think it was last year that he announced in Romania during one of these mass meetings with the Hungarian minority in Romania that he will focus his next term in office more on cultural matters and especially in the education system. So not that much has happened from what I know. Of course, getting rid of the Soros Central European University is a good step.
Which wasn't even getting rid of the university, it was just getting rid of the bullshit programs. I mean, you know, the whole gender studies and all of the whatever nonsense studies. Those are the ones that have been, and they weren't even purged. They were just asked, look, get a proper headquarters, get your paperwork in order, just like everyone else has to. Because, you know, the Romanian Babeș University has a chapter in Budapest, and, you know, even they offered gender studies, and there was no problem with them. It was just Soros wanted to have his own separate rules, and Orban was like, no, you're not getting your separate rules.
Yeah, well, those establishments are usually very used to coming up with their own rules and expecting everybody else to go along. But when it comes to education, if I remember correctly, Orban also made the change that no government universities will have gender studies anymore. Private universities can, but no taxpayer money will be spent on... The state will no longer fund that,
which is, again, a very commonsensical type of policy. I don't even think it is a left-right issue. Is it a science? Is it moral to take taxpayers' money by force, because taxation is theft after all, to take people's money by force to fund middle-class left-wing activists? And I mean, even old Labour would agree that it's not.
Absolutely true. And when it comes to education, it's also worth to think about how education should look like in our times, especially when we're facing more and more competition by China and East Asia. Is it okay for us to use taxpayer money to let 19, 20, 21-year-olds basically have 4 years of vacation where you just party and you study some kind of sociology or gender studies or, I don't know, dance theory or whatever. I mean, maybe we should limit the number of places in universities in general. There was this one Polish philosopher, Bogdan Wolniewicz, if I remember his name correctly. He was something over 90 years old. He died maybe a year or two ago. In Polish, well, for young Poles, he was like from a different world because he was so old, he was from a different time, but he was always very, very honest and candid in things he said. And he loved attacking the universities. And he was saying, you know, in the university, you're supposed to educate the elite. But now, if 50 or 60% of people have a university degree, how can that be elite? That is just masses, and the masses are average. So, and by doing it, it means that nobody's diploma really matters. So yes, this inflation in diplomas should be cut down.
The market is slowly catching up with it. I mean, even big corporations in accounting, in IT, they're explicitly saying, we don't care what your degree is, we're going to test you and we're going to assess you by that. And
we might school you for a little bit if you need it, but sure, if you're an ambitious person and you are, you know, you have a normal IQ or slightly above the average, the door is open.
Yeah, I mean, there is I forget the name of the corporation, but it's one accounting corporation that basically launders money for rich people. And they explicitly recruit people without a degree because, and this was from their press communique, it says too many people come with an economics degree with prejudiced ideas about economics, and so we're going to take people that haven't gone to the university and they still think like normal people about economics, and we might have a better chance at training those and making very good accountants without a degree. And if it can be done in accounting, and it can be done in paralegal, and it can be done in IT, then maybe it can be done in other fields as well.
I think so too.
It comes to a point where not having a degree makes you an elite, which makes sense. It should be a minority, and as you said, if it's 60%, so in Polish universities, it's still the same as it.
Same old. Unfortunately, the forces that are in control of the Ministry of Education here in Poland, they are quite liberal themselves. They belong to the liberal wing of not the Law and Justice Party, but of their small coalition allies that they actually took over from the Civic Platform Party. You could say that they were the conservative wing of the Civic Platform Party, which jumped the ship ahead of the last elections in 2015, joined the Law and Justice Party in this coalition called the United Right. Basically, it really is maybe 36-7% of voters that vote for the Law and Justice Party, and then another 1.5% maybe vote for a party called Solidarna Polska, Solidarian Poland, which is led by our Justice Minister Zbigniew Ziobro, and they are actually further to the right than the Law and Justice Party. But then there is this other small party with maybe 1% or 1.5% called Porozumienie, or the Agreement, or something of the sort, and they are slightly more liberal than the Law and Justice Party, and they are in control of education. So unfortunately, yes, or higher education, not really education, but universities. They had a reform around a year or a year and a half ago, and many of the true conservatives were disappointed because they were hoping that especially the professors, which had been very influential in the Communist Party back in the 70s and 80s, that they would finally be stripped of their positions, basically ruling many of these universities, but unfortunately not.
So they're still waiting for their retirement.
Yes, it looks like probably yes. But there is a problem that the second generation, they have already prepared the next generation that wasn't in the Communist Party but mentally
was.
Yes.
Probably what would have helped, this is what was done in Romania with some collateral damage, but nevertheless it seems to sort of worked for a little bit. But it was done 10 years ago. Basically, if you're 65, we're going to force you to retire.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that's it.
Well, that's
you
what
can you can go teach in a private university
Yes.
if you still want to teach after the age of 65.
Yeah.
And that cleaned up a lot of the old Marxist trash. There's still a lot of them in there,
Yeah.
but 10 years down the line, it looks like there's still fewer than they used to be in early 2000s. So that's probably one.
Yeah, that's
One
something
piece
that
of
we have
policy.
ahead of us that we still need to do. And as I said, hopefully if we get another 4 years, then maybe we can start focusing more on some of these cultural issues. For example, now the LGBTQ lobby issue here in Poland has dominated the public debate over the last few months. Especially it was ahead of the elections to the European Parliament that it became a big thing. And everybody thought that it will just be for that election, but then in the parliamentary election, other issues will come up. But so far, it's been going on, and we'll see.
Yeah, that's a mistake. You never assume it's for one election.
Yeah.
This is what I keep on teaching people when they come to my classes as political operatives. Never assume that it's just for one election. And this is something that the right in Poland has started to learn. That is, you never stop campaigning.
Yeah.
There is no such thing, okay, we won the elections, we'll campaign again 4 years. No. You campaign the whole 4 years and then you keep on campaigning. Because that's what the left does. I mean, the left never takes a break from campaigning.
Actually, when it comes to the LGBTQ lobby issue, there was somewhat of a scandal yesterday with the celebrations or the anniversary, the commemoration of the Warsaw Uprising. In Krakow, the bishop over there, Marek Jędrzejewski, if I remember his last name correctly, he's one of the most conservative figures in the Polish Catholic Church, and of course, having control over the church in Krakow, which is the traditional Polish capital and the slightly more conservative part of Poland, he has a lot of influence. And during Mass yesterday, when he spoke about the Warsaw Uprising, he alluded back to a famous poem by one of the insurgents from the uprising, in which he was saying, I'm paraphrasing, but something along the line, "Oh, we're waiting for you. You read disease to free us from the Black Death from the Nazis. But of course, we don't expect anything from you." Basically, that he was criticizing both systems. And Father Jędrzejewski said that finally this red disease is gone from Poland, but it actually has mutated, and a new form of neo-Marxism is back. This time not under a red flag, but the disease is back under the rainbow flag this time. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, we had the first ever Gay Pride March in Białystok, which is probably the most conservative city in Poland, very close to the Belarusian border. And there we had some cases of violence because football supporters, along with some nationalist groups and general conservatives, tried to block this march. And I assume that mainly the football supporters afterwards, a couple of them attacked some of the participants. And of course, it was a huge outcry. So with that having happened recently, now having one of the most influential men of the church basically calling the LGBTQ, I think he meant the lobby itself, not the people. But of course, the way it was phrased, it was left for interpretation. And as we know, the leftist media, they fill in the blanks and they assume that he encourages more violence against LGBTQ people, which of course I don't believe is what he intended to do.
Probably not. I mean, the Catholic Church may have a lot of sins, but encouraging violence on non-straights is just not one of them.
Yes.
It's just
in general, encouraging to violence that could have happened a couple of centuries ago, but it's been a while since...
not even a couple of centuries ago.
Yeah.
I mean, where was the best safe haven for gay men? It was the church.
Oh yeah, that's true. And actually, when it comes to Poland itself, Poland is, from what I know, the only country in Europe. Maybe there are some other cases. I don't know. Maybe some small states, some Monaco or Liechtenstein or something. I don't know. But homosexual activities were never illegal in Poland. It was first either the Nazis or the communists that I think made it illegal for a period of time, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, it was the same case in Romania. It became illegal in 48 with the commies, and that article in the criminal code was abolished after the commies were removed from power. Yeah. Again, the left has a very, very long history of the things that they accuse conservatives of on. And it's not just in the issue of homophobia, in general.
We have another interesting case here from Poland. As I said earlier, the Civic Platform Party has been turning left, and one of the reasons for it is because there is a new party that was founded this spring, and it's called the Spring Party, and it's led by Poland's most famous openly gay politician, Robert Biedroń, who used to be a mayor in the city of Słupsk. And he founded this party. Initially they had 14% in opinion polls. In the European elections they got, 5.2, 5.4, enough to send one or two people to Brussels, but it wasn't that successful. But still, they stole some votes from the Civic Platform Party, which forced the Civic Platform Party to veer a little bit to the left. And Mr. Biedroń, he posted a picture from his kitchen where he and his husband, I'm not sure what they were doing exactly, but people that were observing closely what was in the picture found that on their fridge there was a little souvenir with Che Guevara on it. So it's very interesting to see that a homosexual couple with left-wing opinions, they still treasure Che Guevara, despite his actions towards
one of the individuals who killed a lot of gay people.
Yes.
And had a very special treatment reserved for gay people, yes.
So yes, this you can see that many people, they don't really understand what the orthodox communists thought about their communities before. Now, of course, with cultural Marxism, this is changing, but the source is poisoned.
Yeah, it's like I was having a discussion with Mr. Lloyd de Jong. I told you about him, and you probably already seen the interview by the time you're watching this. It's the same thing. It's the same thing with Islam. You can't really reform unless you change Muhammad. Same thing with leftism, with the religion of leftism, because I look at them all as cults, essentially as sects. You can't really reform Marxism unless you remove Marx. And Marx didn't have a very high opinion, neither about homosexuals, neither about Slavs. To be so, you know, I can understand when British intellectuals or pseudo-intellectuals fancy themselves as Marxists. But, you know, when I see Hungarian Marxists or Romanian Marxists or Polish Marxists, I'm like, guys, have you read your source material? Because, you know, his opinion about us wasn't particularly high.
Yes.
Or Engels, to be more clear. Engels was even harsher than Marx.
When it comes to these Marxists, then there is also the second or third generation of Marxists that were often found in our corners of Europe. I have in mind those that were active in after the First World War in the 1920s. Those that they had some issues with the communist movement as it developed in Russia. But for example, in Hungary we had Georgi Lukács. In Italy we had Antonio Gramsci. And these
Horkheimer in Germany.
These people were already trying to alter the old Marxist ways a little bit, but really not that much. Just giving expression in a slightly different direction.
One way to shock people by letting them know that the first ever cultural Marxist government in the world was the György Lukács cabinet in Hungary. So you know, that was 100 years ago. So it's not something that is really new. This is
It's been around.
A lot of the people from our side of the aisle need to get educated on that. I mean, this kind of thing of cultural Marxism didn't emerge yesterday or in the 70s or in the 80s. No, it's been around for 100 years. There is no such thing as new ideas.
Absolutely, and it feels, when it comes to Gramsci, for example, that his influence is just growing. Even though he penned down his ideas so long ago, it feels like they're becoming more and more important with time, because they are really being soaked up by a large part of the leftist movement. These old economic Marxists, they really aren't that many anymore. They have gone completely full along with the cultural Marxist path.
I don't blame them because the Marxists lost the economic battle of ideas, and it just sounds weird. I mean, other than the Berlin communists who still argue for rent control and nationalization of homes, there's not really anyone really seriously arguing for economic Marxism anymore.
Yeah.
Because, it's really hard to say that, Warsaw is worse now than it was 30 years ago. Nobody can buy that.
I actually met a woman yesterday.
You met one that does.
Claimed this. Yes. It was pretty interesting. Yeah.
What was her argument? This is fascinating.
We were observing this nationalist march that was passing along the streets of Warsaw after the commemoration of the Warsaw Uprising. And I just sat down on a bench and I listened to her discussing with a different woman, and they were, of course, you could quickly see that they had read all the liberal propaganda about the nationalist movement. So many factual mistakes in what they were saying, but I didn't intervene in any way. But after a while, this one woman left, the other one was still around, and then another woman and a young man started talking to us, and they were obviously fans of the nationalist movement. But this woman that was there from the start, she wasn't. She was, I don't know, 75, maybe 70, so she was definitely older generation. And she was pointing to this nationalist march and saying, look how many police officers are around to guard, keep us safe from this filth or something of the sort. Back in my time, I remember the good marches, the May 1st marches. It was all...
Those ones had police officers too. I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah, they were so orderly. I brought along my kids gladly. It was a great time for Poland. And I was like, but what about all the people that, they waited 20 years for buying a car or had to stand hours and hours in line to buy some meat, if there was any meat available at all. Yeah. And she was like, it wasn't that bad. Today it's way worse. Like, look at Warsaw, look how many unemployed people there are. And actually, I think, 2.5% or 3% like unemployment in Warsaw. So as you can see, this woman, she lives in a very different world than the rest of us.
That's not having her own bubble. Her own bubble is on a different planet. I mean, 3% unemployment, that's by EU standards, is very, very low.
Oh, yeah.
That's one aspect. And the May 1st marches, I saw footage from those from the 80s. They had police officers too.
Really?
I mean, police officers at public manifestations is something that's pretty normal, even in communist regimes and in democratic regimes. And
absolutely. And also, my mother used to share some stories from the May 1st marches in Poland that she attended when she was 14, 15, 16 years old. And the big difference between a nationalist march today in Warsaw and the May 1st marches back
voluntary attendance?
Is the voluntary attendance, yes.
The communists didn't particularly take so you're saying the communists didn't particularly take kindly the no for NASA?
No, you had to march.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, these kinds of people are always fascinating. And sadly, you can find them everywhere. I mean, I've met nostalgics, as I like to call them. I met a few of them, like living three blocks away from in Lviv, 3 blocks away from the Lonskoho prison, which I'm sure you know because you've been. Have you been to Lviv?
Not Lviv, unfortunately.
You should go there. You should visit the Lonskoho prison because the tour guide is the daughter of a woman who survived there. And if you hurry up, you might even get to still meet the man that I interviewed in 2016. He's like 97 or something like that. And Ivan Mamchur, I think is his name. And he can tell you a thing or two about what communism looks like in practice.
Oh yeah.
And and people living like 3 blocks away from that particular gulag, essentially, they're like, oh, it was better in the Soviet Union. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? There are about 10,000 bodies piled up like here.
200 meters away from where we are discussing.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So these kinds of nostalgics, they're just everywhere.
Yeah.
For some reason, biology works against them. So I guess there's that.
That is true. When it comes to the situation with nostalgics here in Poland, again coming back to the elections we have coming up, I mentioned that this new left-wing party, the Spring Party, led by this homosexual politician, they have around probably 5% support.
They'll probably be in the next same.
It looks like it, and especially now because they are forming a coalition, a slightly unexpected coalition, because there are two other left-wing elements. What was very nice with the last parliamentary elections was that the socialists
got out.
Got out. There was not a single socialist or Marxist politician in the Polish parliament, which was very nice because I think it was probably the only case in Europe of such a situation. But now, unfortunately, it looks like they could come back because this alliance of the Spring Party, which is the main engine, so to say, and then we have the old Communist Party, which later in the early 90s took on the new name of, what are they called in English? The left-wing Democrats or something of the sort, I guess, would be the English name. They are the dinosaurs, so to say, mainly the representatives, their voters, all of them,
kind of like Die
plus.
Linke in Germany.
Oh yes.
Although Die Linke has gotten a more modern smiley face lately, but it's still basically the old DDR party.
And then there is a third party, the Razem party, the full-on cultural Marxist, neo-Marxist party. And they, ahead of the last elections, they said that under no circumstances will we form a coalition with the old Polish Communist Party. But now they are more pragmatic.
They're having a change of heart.
Yes, so now it will be a three-party coalition of the left going to the elections, the Spring Party, the old Polish Communist Party, and this new neo-Marxist together Razem party.
Isn't there a rule that alliances of parties have a higher threshold?
8% or 8.5%? I'm
like
not
that.
sure.
So
probably
more
8.
than 5 for sure.
More than 5. So
isn't it a bit risky?
It is a bit risky. I'm hoping that some of these Razem voters, for example, now that they see that their politicians will go for the coalition anyway. If they get 7.9%,
that would be awesome.
It would be wonderful.
Something like that happened last time too.
Yes, last time I think they formed a coalition with other very small socialist parties.
And they got like 6 something.
7.5, if I remember correctly. So they were close, but they didn't make it.
And all their votes got redistributed.
Yes,
the first two.
And according to this don't method of how they distribute mandates, of course, that benefited the Law and Justice Party a lot, which made it possible for them to get a single party majority, despite only having 37.5% of the votes. Of course, now in the European Parliament elections this spring, they got 45.6, if I remember correctly. So we're hoping that this fall it won't be 37% like last time over, but 45, 46, who knows, if we get a big surprise, maybe 47, 48 even. A bit unlikely, but...
If I were to write the propaganda and the subversion, I would advise the left-wing side of the Platforma Obywatelska, of the Liberal Party. I would advise them to form their own party, because that's how it happened in Romania. The real cultural Marxists, they tried to get their way within the traditional parties, and they were starting to have starting to get a little bit of success, but they kept on failing because they kept on hitting the deep state, which is particularly not friendly to cultural Marxist views in Romania. So as a result, someone might have convinced them that basically creating their own party would be a better idea. So they did in 2016, and they got like 8% or something like that. And now in the European elections, they got like 30 or 27 or something like that. And now they're feeling very confident, of course. What they fail to realize is that every single marginal force gets disproportionately a lot of votes in the European elections because the electorate is like that those elections don't even matter. So it's going to be quite fun when reality will set in. But it's basically easier to have them have their own party. Because it's easier to differentiate, it's easier to discriminate. What does discrimination mean? To make a difference, and it's easier to differentiate. And it's also even funnier because once they start battling for power with each other, That's when it gets really fun.
Well, as I said earlier, in the Civic Platform Party, we have this divide between the young wolves that are slightly more liberal, and who knows, maybe so far I have to give him some credit for this. The party leader of the Civic Platform Party, Grzegorz Schetyna, he is known for being completely without any kind of charisma, zero charisma. Not very smart either, not really some kind of a philosopher or anything of the sort. But when it comes to internal party machinery, he's
machinations.
Yes, he's quite good. So I suspect that probably the party splitting is unlikely. If somebody would try to split, I think it's going to be a couple of MPs, and they won't be able to really form this massive movement. But we'll see. If he loses this next election again, it will be another election lost after the European parliamentary elections lost, and maybe he will have to go. But we don't really see anybody who could step in and take his place. They really lack leaders.
Either way, it should be encouraged, just for the fun of it.
Maybe actually the mayor of Warsaw that I mentioned earlier, this younger, even more liberal guy, he could maybe be a candidate to take over, but it's early to tell. We'll see.
Right. Let's shift gears a little bit. You've been to Ukraine since the last time we met. So technically, for about 3 weeks, you had a more recent experience of Ukraine than I do, because I go there pretty often.
It was my first time.
Yeah, and then I went during the election campaign, just before Volodymyr Zelensky was elected.
First round or second round?
Between the first and the second round. I went in the election campaign, and I left the country 2 days before the vote.
Yes. Because I think I arrived a day or two after the vote, if I remember correctly. So I think it was, or a day or two before. My memory is slightly cloudy.
Yeah, it was very close to when I was leaving the country, wasn't it?
But it was evident that Zelensky was going to become the new president. So I was trying to feel the young generation out a little bit, what they were thinking. I thought I would run into some Poroshenko supporters, but basically none. So I was slightly surprised.
Yeah, if you wanted to run into Poroshenko supporters, they should have gone to Lvov or Uzhgorod, the far west, essentially. The far west, it's not just the way they vote, even looking at the map may give you the wrong impression, but the people there tend to be significantly more pragmatic. It could be because they've been occupied by pretty much everyone in the last 100 years. I mean, there's not a single neighbor of Ukraine that didn't own territory there, at least for a few months. Even Czechoslovakia owned territory there. So as a result, the people there tend to be a little bit more pragmatic in the way they look at the world. In Kiev, probably just like Warsaw, there's a lot of appetite for revolutionary nonsense. There's a lot of appetite for let's experiment. This is a new era. No, it's not. We have new ideas. No, you don't. And all of that. And it's very hard to explain to them that no, you don't. No, you can't.
Yeah, it's. I feel like they really took a big risk with Zelensky. I mean, of course, the steps forward taken after the revolution in Ukraine have been pretty small compared to what people were expecting. But they were still moving in the right direction, even if slowly. But definitely away from the old system. Meaning the Russian focus system. Of course, business ties over there are always still intermingled. That is true. But politically,
there's nothing. That's something one cannot change in 4 years or 5 years.
No, absolutely not.
Maybe 30.
Definitely. But you could still feel that they were moving on this Western trajectory slightly. Kiev was becoming more like Lviv than earlier. Definitely more turning to Lviv than to Donetsk or Lugansk or
Odessa. Or Odessa.
or Odessa. So it looked good. Of course, they paid a huge price to make this change, and now I feel that they are risking it by voting for some kind of TV clown that you can't really trust.
Yeah, my main objection to Zelensky was basically, look, this guy has he doesn't even manage his own TV show.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what is exactly the huge managerial experience that Volodymyr Zelensky has.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've been following the news from Ukraine, but he also called for, well, technically anticipated elections. They were supposed to take place in October. He called them in July.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily something really huge, but the way his political party selected their candidates was really weird and something that would be appropriate, I don't know, in Switzerland or in Spain, you know, countries that aren't particularly threatened to be invaded anytime soon by anyone.
Yeah.
I guess those could be places where you could do these kinds of experiments. But in Ukraine, I don't know if selecting your candidates for MPs by internet lottery is particularly a good idea.
Yeah,
but that's exactly what happened, because his political party, of course, didn't have the reservoir of cadre necessary to...
No, I mean, what did he get? 48% or something in the parliamentary election?
Something in that ballpark,
yeah. So it's a lot of seats that need to be filled.
42. 42, but he might get 48% of the mandates.
Yeah.
But might as well get 39, because this was the last time in the elections were carried under a mixed system.
Oh, yes.
So part of it is party list, what you vote is what you get, and part of it is a single constituency.
Sure.
So you could technically get a majority in the parliament with 32%, or get 55% of the votes and still not get a majority in the parliament. That law was also changed. The next elections in 2023, or probably even earlier. Yeah. by the way things are going, probably earlier.
If there will be any elections, if Ukraine will still remain as a...
Oh, there will be, but I don't think there will be in 2023. It's probably going to have to be earlier.
Yeah.
Those ones will be entirely party list, which I guess it privileges these kinds of new revolutionary parties. But you know, when you're the only revolutionary in town, I guess that's attractive. But what if another revolutionary shows up?
Yeah, and Ukraine is very turbulent. I mean, we remember the Orange Revolution. What was it now? 15 years ago, almost. It feels like it feels like there is this cycle in Ukraine that has been going on for around 20 years, maybe. With there is some turbulence, some new faces appear. They are given a 5-6 years at most, and then there is another change of cards. So Poroshenko came to power. He got a few years. That was the end of that, and then at least it wasn't a violent revolution. But the way they voted for Zelensky, I mean, in the presidential election, what did he get? 72%?
Something like that. It's very massive.
Yeah. So the way that he managed to really convince all these people to vote for him, I really don't know what to think about it. To be honest, I'm quite shocked that it was that high. I imagine that he could get 55, 60, but 72. Yeah. I don't know. It will be interesting to watch and see what happens. Of course, some polls are hoping that Zelensky could actually be good for Poland, that there could be some kind of reapproachment between the two countries. I mean, we had a huge opportunity after the Maidan revolution. It was partly wasted, though. There were faults on both sides. Russia, of course, meddled in the entire thing. That's for certain. But yeah, some people, because some of the nationalist forces that were very important during the Maidan revolution, they were the one that brought the muscle to Maidan. They had to be taken into account when they were giving out government positions, and of course they wouldn't give them the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Ministry of Economy or anything like that, but they gave them control over the Institute of National Remembrance in Ukraine. So they were allowed to give this or shape
the narrative
about history a lot. And of course, since they treasure the memory of the Ukrainian insurgent army, which conducted some genocidal acts in the Volhynia and Eastern Galicia region during the war against the Poles, against the Jews, of course, as well. The Poles aren't very fond of them.
Against the Czechs and against the Hungarians. Particularly
basically
nice
any minority living in that
and
region.
quite a few Ukrainians as well.
And Ukrainians that didn't respect their authority.
Who weren't Ukrainian enough or whatever.
Yes. So quite many. Of course, what many Poles failed to realize was that this memory of the Ukrainian insurgent army that this grew in importance during the Maidan Revolution and the months leading up to it. It wasn't because of some new anti-Polish sentiment or anything. It was just the easiest, most ready available tool against Russian influence.
Yeah, when you go into a propaganda war, you go with the tools that you have, not the tools you would imagine you would have, you would dream about having.
Exactly. So I feel like some Poles. Of course, this is difficult for me to say as a Pole too, that we should forget about the massacres during the war, or, which is a big issue here in Poland, being allowed to excavate these mass graves and try to identify some of the people that still lie spread out on fields across the Volhynia region without a real grave. But at the same time, I was telling many of my friends that now with the Maidan Revolution, we have for the first time an opportunity to reverse the Treaty of Andrusovo in 1667, when basically the Russians, the Muscovites, they gained the allegiance of the Zaporizhian Cossacks, who earlier used to be subjects of the Polish king. Now instead they served the Tsar in Moscow, and because of that we gradually lost more and more influence in Ukraine. First we lost left bank Ukraine, everything east of the Dnieper River, and then more and more we started losing the right bank Ukraine too.
Yeah, it's basically the partition of Poland, episode 1.
Yes, and if that would have never happened, if we would have able to keep Kiev within our sphere of influence back in those days, there would have been a good chance that there wouldn't have been any partitions at all. So I was saying that this is the first opportunity in 350 years that we have to finally get the Ukrainians on our side, not under our boot, under our rule or anything like that, but like real partners. And I feel like if we would be able to convince the Ukrainians to this Intermarium project together with us, then within time Belarus would follow too. Of course, Lukashenko, he is quite old, and I don't believe that he will get his wish of getting his son to replace him. I feel other forces will appear. Probably similar to Lukashenko.
Probably they're already formed and just waiting, because biology is biology.
Absolutely. I think there will be also people of the old system that are prepared to replace Lukashenko and not change that much. But after that, I think there will be a new, younger generation of Belarusians who also have access to the internet, and they can compare the quality of life in Warsaw or
even Kiev.
Vilnius or Kiev or whatever, compared to some Penza in Russia or whatever. Yes, I'm hoping that if we get Ukraine to function as a well-functioning state, or maybe not well functioning, but at least functioning.
Let's keep it.
Let's limit our ambitions.
Yeah.
But then I think that finally Belarus could come along too.
Yeah, I can understand why the sentiments and the emotions run high when you see, for instance, in Lvov, Ulica Stepana Bandery. I can understand why that tends to be an issue. On the other hand, again, you could probably take a page from the Romanian-Hungarian relations, where things have gotten better, even with the, Horthy statue in the middle of Budapest, which now has been slowly moved away from the public side. But, just keep it in the, let the loons fight each other in one corner, let the adults speak at a different table.
Yeah.
That's basically how you fix this. Now, that you mentioned Belarus, I'm going to ask you a question that I saw in the comment section, and or was it on an email? No, it wasn't on an email. In an event, I didn't know what to answer, so I'm going to ask you this one. Is someone who's been trying to study is American of Polish descent, and he's been studying the geopolitics of the Intermarium, and he was telling me that he's meeting a lot of allegedly grassroots support for getting Belarus into the Intermarium type of geopolitics, but completely rejecting Ukraine. Is that really a thing? And if it is, why?
Yeah, I haven't come across the sentiment, to be honest. From what I can tell in Belarus, the opposition...
No, he's speaking about Poles supporting getting Belarus around but totally rejecting Ukraine.
Okay, I see, yeah, because it would sound strange if there would be Belarusian oppositionists that aren't in favor of Ukraine, because they're usually tied very closely. Yes, in Poland there is quite a big, big, they are not really big, but they are quite loud. They are a faction of either the nationalist movement or the traditional conservatives that don't favor Ukraine, but they view Belarus very fondly. I wouldn't say that they dominate that movement here in Poland, but
they're loud enough to punch beyond their weight.
Yes, and they definitely exist. They, in my opinion, they have a slightly wrong view of history, because by the sound of them, it usually sounds like with the Ukrainians we always had problems, from the Zaporizhian Cossacks rebelling against us to the UPA in World War II, but also the Ukrainian Organization of Nationalists in the interwar era in Poland, which conducted some terrorist attacks and so on in the support of an independent Ukraine, and they compare that to our relations with the Belarusians, which they claim were always excellent. We had some problems with appearing Belarusian nationalism in Poland in the interwar era, and even a little bit in the years ahead of it. It wasn't as strong as in Ukraine, because in Belarus, of course, the national identity is much weaker, and especially back then it was very weak. But for example, during the Second World War, in this area around Białystok today in Poland, we have a small Belarusian minority that still lives there today. And at the later stages of the Second World War, well, even in 1939, when the Soviets invaded, many of these Belarusians, they came out against the Polish state, supporting the Soviet Union. Since there was a republic, a Belarusian republic in the Soviet Union, there was a Ukrainian republic in the Soviet Union, and the Ukrainians living in interwar Poland, many of them supported the Red Army, because they had their Ukrainian brothers fighting on the other side. The same situation with the Belarusians, and they sensed that this was finally a way of, even if within the Soviet Union, but our Belarusian area or Ukrainian area will finally be united. The most inflamed situation today historically is probably the figure of a Polish anti-communist member of the anti-communist underground, Romuald Rajs, codename Bury, who was active in that region where the Belarusian minority lives, and he probably his troops committed a few attacks on some Belarusian villages, killing some civilians. Well, in that time and in that area of Poland, this was standard procedure. To be frank,
yeah, I was about to say that was a time when that was not just acceptable, but standard operating procedure.
Yes, we have many similar cases in Ukraine. As I said earlier, there was the big ethnic cleansing in Ukraine, or genocidal operation, where they basically attacked the Poles, not out of nowhere, but almost. There wasn't a lot of conflict before, and then in 1943, on what was it, July 11th, I think, they attacked 99 Polish villages in one day, and one Sunday, bloody Sunday, and killed around 10,000 Poles out of the blue. And then the campaign just continued. And after a while, the Poles started defending themselves, and there were cases of Polish underground troops massacring 100, 150, 200 civilians in a Ukrainian village. But of course, those civilians at the same time were actively supporting the other side, feeding them, sheltering them, hiding them, sharing information with them, and so on. So the lines were very blurred. So this
As they usually are in these kinds of conflicts.
Of course.
And this is true today as well.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the lines between, the Kurds and the Islamists, and you look at Syria in particular.
Syria.
A very similar situation that was here.
The chaos is enormous. So with this particular member of the Polish underground, Bury, he is still very treasured by the Polish nationalists, and also a large part of Polish conservatives in general. By the local minority, he's considered a genocidal butcher. And every year in the city of Hajnówka, which lies just on the border with Belarus, there is a march commemorating Bury by Polish nationalists. Of course, the local Belarusians, they hate it. And there is this little conflict going on over there. So you can say that this is a micro example of the larger conflict between Polish nationalists and Ukrainian nationalists over the events of World War II. But we have something similar with the Belarusians, but in a smaller scale. But many of these Poles, they fail to realize this, and they believe that the Belarusians, they simply love us, and that they would gladly join some kind of Intermarium. And also, to be honest, the Ukrainians, they're 40 million. The Belarusians, there's 10 of them. The country is much smaller. It lies in an area which is less strategic. They don't have access to the Black Sea.
Portions of it are still uninhabitable because of Chernobyl.
Of course,
by portions of it, I mean half of the country.
The Pripyat marshes, of course, they were the Soviets. They eliminated much of it in the 50s and 60s, turning it into farmland instead of swamps. But still, the Pripyat marshes are big. They also aren't really. They can support larger populations. So geopolitically, Belarus is less important than Ukraine. On the other hand, it also has some importance for us Poles, because whether the Russian army is stationed on the border between Belarus and Russia, or whether it's stationed 100 kilometers east of Warsaw, is a big deal.
That tends to matter, although you still have the Kaliningrad issue. So.
Yes, but with Kaliningrad, it's still an enclave that needs to be supported by their navy. It's not good, of course, but it's a little easier to handle than if we would have Russian military stationed in Belarus. So I would say that is the main important thing for us Poles. We need to make sure that, of course, there are these ideas now that this union between Belarus and Russia needs to deepen.
They already have a sort of Schengen agreement.
Yes, they do. I don't remember what it's called in English, but this union state that they call between Belarus and Russia. From what I understand, the Russians, they sent an ambassador to Belarus quite recently, who is known to be an operative who was active in Transnistria and Donetsk before.
Yeah, I think they sent Kozak, which is
So he is known as a hardline hawk, and they say that this could be a signal that the Russians are desperate to make sure that either Lukashenko agrees to deepen, or that as soon as Lukashenko is gone, that the Russians are quickly on top of this issue, and that Belarus is once again taken into with the Russian motherland. I'm a bit fearful with Belarus because
the silver lining here is that Cossack failed in Transnistria, so you know.
there is always hope.
Yeah,
there is always hope, but
and with Transnistria it should have been technically easier because it's a smaller place. So, you know, with Belarus.
But with Belarus, the Belarusian people I've met here in Warsaw, some of them, of course, belong to the opposition and they are anti-Russian. But the people that aren't particularly politically involved, which the masses usually aren't. They are very. They see Moscow as a very natural father, so to say. They watch Russian TV. They don't watch Western TV that much. They aren't fascinated by Western music. They are very closely tied to
They're
Moscow.
definitely within the Moscow-centric universe.
Yeah. So I'm a bit unsure about where Belarus will go in the future.
Yeah, you mentioned that we'll see how Zelensky will behave himself in the geopolitical stage. But until we look at Zelensky, let's look in our own backyard. Volodymyr Zelensky was not invited in the Ljubljana summit, the Three Seas initiative, by the decision primarily of Mr. Borut Pahor, the president of Slovenia. What the fuck are we doing here?
Well, here we have an interesting issue with the Three Seas initiative. I'm a little bit uncertain about which way we should go with this because, of course, just by starting it, the Polish president Andrzej Duda and the Croatian president Kolinda, both of them faced a lot of opposition within the region because it's many states with quite different interests after all, and many of these smaller states, they lack confidence and they don't want to take any action that could be viewed by Berlin as being anti-European, meaning anti-Berlin.
Berlin tends to have this historical tendency of seeing itself as Europe.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And not as European, but as Europe.
Yes, and especially in our region. There is, of course, the German idea of Mitteleuropa, which goes back to World War I, where after the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, they were trying to somehow administer these new conquered areas and make them very dependent on Berlin and making sure that the entire economy is restructured to basically just supply whatever needs the Germans have. And today we see that 100 years later the situation is very similar. But the fact that we managed to establish the Three Seas initiative was still a huge success, according to me. And the question is, would it be too ambitious to try to include these countries that aren't EU member states at the moment? So far, this is what I see the reason for why Zelensky wasn't invited. That countries, other Eastern Partnership countries, whether it's Armenia, whether it's Georgia or Ukraine or Belarus, right now they try to keep the Three Seas initiative completely separate from that Eastern question, so to say. And I'm not sure whether this is too cowardly. Or whether it's a good strategy to wait a little bit, consolidate what we already have, and when we are in a stronger position, which we will be because our economies are growing significantly faster than the Western European or German economy by that matter. And we all know exponential growth. If Berlin grows 1.5% per year, our region grows 4%. Give it 10 years and we will be in a very different situation. So
that's true, but what bothered me the most is that the decision was left to Borut Pahor. I mean, with all due bloody respect, but seriously, now admittedly, I have my own reasons to be a little bit iffy about that, because, you know, the thing is that Slovenia is basically, you know, think of Sweden speaking a sort of Slavic language, that's basically Slovenia for you. And also smaller, only 2 million people.
Yeah, I mean, we have the Czech Republic, which us Poles, we view, I guess, the Czechs a little bit similar, as many Slavs down in the Balkans view Slovenia as this strange Germanic entity with the Slavic language that also wants to distance itself from its Slavic neighbors. But yeah.
Yeah. So that was my main problem essentially. I mean, come on, the president of Slovenia gets to decide on. That's one aspect. Second aspect, you do know that the recession is coming to Germany. So we'll see how that will affect our region, because there will be an effect. Unfortunately. Probably won't be that big though. Will probably be the same situation that occurred in 2008 when our region had only 1 year of recession and then we kept on growing, whereas Western Europe needed 3 or 4 years until they went back to growth, and that was anemical anyway.
Yeah, it was practically only the Baltic states that were hit hard by the 2008 crisis.
And there is this strange coincidence that it always happens with the countries that have made the unfortunate mistake of joining the Deutschmark, otherwise known as the euro currency. Why don't we learn about it? Because since then, and I think it was Estonia, was it Lithuania? No, Estonia that joined in 2014 to the Deutschmark. You know, they were safe in 2008 because they were not in the Eurozone. Now they're in the Eurozone.
Yeah, we have a similar problem in the Visegrad group with Slovakia.
Which has had its standard of living collapse after joining the Eurozone. And they still haven't recovered, even though their economy has been growing.
Sure, but the prices have been growing just as quick. We see it a lot in southeastern Poland, where 10 years ago this was unheard of, but now the Slovaks, they come in large numbers, just cross the border, and they shop. They shop a lot because prices are much lower. Yeah,
shopping in zloty tends to be a little bit more economically convenient than in Deutschmarks.
Yeah, and also the influence it has on Slovak politics.
Their new president.
Oh, don't even get me started. Don't even get me started. Yeah, I think recently she met with Orban, and of course she immediately went to the media and stated that she believes that the rule of law issue is paramount for the Visegrad group. So basically she criticized Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic too at the same time, and tried to portray herself as the only representative that is truly European, Western and liberal. So
but she's not even liberal. She's a commie. I mean, you know, I can reason with liberals, but I can't reason with commies.
Yeah, no, Miss Chaputova
is a special cookie for sure.
At least she's just the president and not the prime minister.
Yeah, which in Slovakia tends to matter.
Yeah, so I just hope that her popularity doesn't translate into the birth of any new political movement, which
doesn't seem to be the case so far.
Yeah. So as long as she remains the president but doesn't have any influence over the parliament, it's not the end of the world. Slovakia is also interesting when it comes to the parliamentary politics, because this Smer SD, I mean, they are a typical post-communist party in Central Eastern Europe, but as some other of those parties here, they haven't gone along with the cultural Marxist agenda, which is pervasive in Western Europe. So they are corrupt, of course, but so are almost all parties in this part of the world.
And not just this part of the world. I mean, Karolinska Universitetssjukhuset, need I say more?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, but
because lately I've come to this, and of course I've gotten a lot of flack, especially inside Romania, for saying this, but I've come to this line of thought that we've allowed way too much criticism on our region for corruption, and of course most of it was warranted. There used to be a lot of corruption within our region. But nowadays, I'm not seeing a difference into the corruption practiced by the Smer or by Fidesz or by the Social Democrats in Romania when compared to the Socialdemokraterna in Sweden or the CDU in Deutschland.
I mean, just look at what Macron is doing in France.
Yeah, and then I was about to mention En Marche. I mean, really, is it really that much of a big difference anymore? It used to be, of course, 20 years ago, I was all on board with the anti-corruption narrative. It was true.
We all remember.
But is it still true?
We all remember Berlusconi's contacts with the mafia, for example. He was still the prime minister.
Well, that's another thing. People assume Italy has changed.
Yeah.
Newsflash, it hasn't.
Yeah. So no, I agree with you.
I mean, I agree.
That.
Salvini is a very nice, cute, smiley face, but Italy is still corrupt.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Even by EU metrics, is the most corrupt country in the Union.
But yeah, you are right about this. That the issue of corruption, which now has fused with this rule of law argument. Of course, the next budget for the EU is coming up. It will be another 7 years of funds that will be decided. Well, I guess next year will be the real year when they start fighting over the money, because the
fight
budget
has already started.
It has started.
You've seen it the way they negotiated the positions.
But it was also very interesting what our new president of the European Commission,
Ursula von der Leyen.
Yeah,
I was surprised by her level of pragmatism. She courted Fidesz.
She did.
She courted and got the votes from Fidesz.
Oh, sure.
Which was inconceivable 2 months before.
That is true, but also the results of the European Parliament elections, where the EPP lost their chance to, together with the Socialist Party, to rule the European Parliament as they have done before. Now we have influence from the Green parties and from the old ALDE group, Mr. Verhofstadt's group.
Renew Europe.
Yes, under a new name.
Led by Dacian Cioloș, by far the worst prime minister Romania ever had. No wonder he only held office for like 11 months, because everyone kind of agreed you suck.
Yeah, so Miss von der Leyen, she's a pragmatic. She has courted Viktor Orban, but she has also courted those people. And when you see her statements on fighting global warming, on gender parities in the Commission, but she has also been quite strong on the rule of law issue. So I'm expecting quite a big conflict ahead or after, in case that this rule of law mechanism comes into place, which means that you can stop funds being transferred to a country if some kind of entity, some kind of European body, probably the European Court of Justice, will be allowed to rule that no, the rule of law in Poland or Hungary is not being followed. We won't send the funds that they are entitled to according to EU treaties. What will happen then? Will our governments budge? Or will this just escalate the conflict? I guess we'll have to wait and find out. It's going to be
up to us to elect governments with balls who will just say, you know what, fuck off.
I think that this is the most reasonable thing to do. Let's say, sure, keep your money. We won't contribute with the money that we owe you either.
We're going to keep our money and we're going to keep our policies. Let's see what next, because the EU doesn't have a mechanism to kick countries out.
This is also very important. There is an Article 50. But
there is no the equivalent for kicking countries out.
No. Yeah. So yes, it will be interesting to see how this conflict will develop. Will also be interesting to see what happens in the Czech Republic with Babiš, because he is getting a lot of criticism. The EU elites definitely don't like him, especially after he froze the EU migrant quota mechanism in the Czech Republic. I think they accepted 60 or 70 people, according to the mechanism.
That sounds reasonable by Czech standards.
And then they said, yeah, that's it, no more. And this issue with the European quota migrants, the EU, it is coming back alive a little bit after this recent meeting in Paris, where Macron and Merkel again tried to now create a form of a coalition of the willing with these 14 countries that said that they will, whichever migrants are
loved Salvini's reaction to that.
Sure. If you want to discuss, come to Rome.
Yeah, the guy went full shit posting on them. Look, we're not your ass. We're not your whores in here to just tell us what to do. Fuck off. No, you come here and you talk to me.
Yeah.
Right. So on the migration aspect, I guess we cannot move on to the next point until we comment a little bit on the issue of the German activist arrested in Italy.
Miss Carola Rackete.
Rackete, yes.
Oh yeah.
Isn't that a little bit peculiar? I mean, even by EU politics standard, it's still a bit peculiar.
Yeah.
Here you have a very well politically connected German conducting, well, essentially human trafficking on the soil of Italy.
Yes.
And then you get Brussels coming in and say, oh no, you gotta let her loose. No.
Well, for me it was very interesting to see, because here in Poland, of course, we had a huge fight recently about our judicial system, which our government tried to reform, and all the liberal opposition was saying that, oh no, right now the judicial system is impartial. It's professional and it's completely.
I agree, it's professional, but with the impartial part,
it doesn't have any political leverage, or it doesn't get involved in politics at all. So in Italy, the magistrates which decided to not prosecute Miss Carola Rackete, first off, the Italian parliament, they passed the Salvini security decree, which gave him the power to judging that a vessel is a threat to national security, and it will not be allowed to anchor in an Italian port. Ms. Rackete was informed that her boat has been classified as one of those boats. She's not allowed to enter their port. She entered the port anyway. And while doing it, she rammed an Italian boat, or Coast Guard boat, or Guardia di Finanza, which is responsible for combating smuggling in Italy. She risked the lives of 4 or 5 of their people, and then the judge allows her to leave without being prosecuted. I can't imagine a European citizen ramming the police of a different country, whether it's by car or by boat or by anything.
I think if I were to do this in Morocco, there would be a problem with the Moroccan courts. I don't think
25 years, 30.
Yeah. You would be looking at the very least at 10 in a solitary confinement by Moroccan standards.
Having some rats eating your feet.
Yeah, people don't realize just how terrible Moroccan jails can they be.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm bringing up Morocco is because a Moroccan citizen beat up a what's it called, a beach rescuer in Constanța in Romania. And the Romanian prosecutor was like, we're going to prosecute him here, but then we're going to use our bilateral treaty with Morocco, so he can serve time in jail in Morocco, because that's awesome.
Oh, yeah, that's...
he might be getting, I don't know, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, but a year in a Moroccan jail is like 10.
It's like 5.
Or at least 5 years in a EU jail, for sure.
Yeah, no, it's important to be pragmatic.
I can't remember a time when a European citizen did this in Mexico or in Morocco or in Egypt or in Israel or in Saudi Arabia and got away with it.
But it's also nice that Miss Carola Rackete is a German citizen, because if it would have been some, I don't know, a Lithuanian or whatever, it wouldn't have been as symbolic. But here we see that under the current functioning of the European Union, an activist, a daughter of a millionaire in Germany, is allowed to sail into Italian waters, ram their Coast Guard boats, and get away with it because European pressures. Of course, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Heiko Maas, the German Minister of Foreign Affairs, he also delivered a statement, I think a day or 2 before the magistrates decided on whether she should be prosecuted or not. And he told Italy that basically the Salvini security decree is invalid because it goes against all human rights and saving lives at sea.
So there is such thing as the human right to commit human trafficking?
Apparently so. Apparently so.
We keep on discovering new human rights lately in Europe, haven't we?
If you are ferrying sub-Saharan migrants into Europe, then apparently you can use any kind of method you want to make sure that you disembark them in Europe.
I see. We keep on discovering new human rights lately. I mean,
it's like they have the ever closer union. Maybe they have the ever expanding human rights also as a component.
Are we turning into a gigantic Sweden, a humanitarian superpower, or
the European humanitarian super? I think we're moving in that direction. Yes, and of course, this is a different topic. But maybe we could make some comparisons with climate change policies, because I feel that this is also something that is happening right now. Before we already stated that these new human rights, as long as you can reach the goal, which is flood basically Europe in non-European migrants, then now I think that there will be some steps taken in climate change policy too. Our region especially, which is quite dependent on traditional carbon resources. As I said earlier, our region grows at around 4% a year, and I think that in Western Europe they are starting to view this as a threat, that we might get too independent, and they will try to find a way to slow down our economic growth, and climate change taxes and so on.
We've seen some of that play out during the 3 Seas Initiative Summit. I don't know if you've had the chance to look at my videos, my reporting from the and it was consistently, the Polish representative, and then the next day the Romanian president as well. Look, no, we're going to keep on building nuclear. We're going to keep on using coal because we got to grow. Yeah. And then you had Miguel Berger, the Secretary of State from Germany, outright denouncing sanctions against Russia.
Oh yeah,
and shilling quite a lot for various Duginist policies, including, of course, Nord Stream 2. And then when you point this out, you get called a pro-Russian shill for some reason.
It's incredible.
I arrived in Poland on July 29th. On July the 28th, I've had a huge argument with a political operative in Romania. He kept on calling me a Russian shill. And I'm like, look, and I gave him the statement by Miguel Berger. I'm like, this guy is a Russian shill. And you call me a Russian shill because I say, look, the most Russian shilling institution right now is the German government.
Yeah.
Followed very closely by the European Commission.
Now we have the visa issue too. They say that the Germans, they are thinking about allowing visa-free travel with Russia to the European Union.
For Russian citizens on all over the EU.
If I understand correctly.
I don't think it's up to them to decide that.
No. It could also be to Germany.
Germany can decide that for itself.
For themselves. Yes. But
then it would mean that everyone neighboring Germany would have to reinstitute border patrol, because to be fair, the Schengen Agreement is dead already. Yeah. I mean, according to the Schengen Agreement itself, it says that if 3 countries decide
for longer than,
and that's been already the case. I mean, it's
sure, there are still border controls between Denmark and Sweden.
Denmark and Sweden, Denmark and Germany, Austria and Slovenia. What else? Slovakia and Poland. So yeah, there we go. And of course, Italy and France.
Yeah. Yeah. Macron doesn't allow anybody to cross that border.
Yeah. So I mean, the Schengen Agreement is probably dead already.
Yeah.
Dead already.
Also, there is the issue of Brexit. We're still waiting. Earlier, we were saying that we were waiting for the coalition talks after the elections in Germany to, once they are done, then maybe we will see how the European Union will prepare for a post-Brexit future. Then we had the European Parliament elections, and we are also, maybe after the European Parliament elections we will know. But now we still have the Brexit that has been prolonged all along, and now with Boris in
What's
October.
your take on Boris Johnson?
Well,
he definitely speaks better than Theresa May. That we can attest.
His humor is nice. He has great historical knowledge. I always respect people that know history. Boris knows history very well. But at the same time, you can feel that he's just a power-hungry pragmatist, that he really lacks ideological foundation. But that doesn't mean that he can tap into a conservative ideological source as a way to keep himself in power. Of course, in Parliament he has one MP that gives him the majority at the moment. If he will push for a Brexit, which will be a no-deal Brexit, I expect a number of Conservative MPs to leave the Conservative Party. And in that case, snap elections are the only possibility. If Boris will play the no-deal Brexit card, maybe also tap into a little anti-mass immigration sentiment, not as much, of course, as Jared Batten and UKIP, but just send some signals, like he did when his famous Burqa statement that they look like post boxes. Why would you want to look like that?
Not that he was wrong.
No, but I mean, we had the Brexit party at 20-25% in many polls. If he could steal just 10% from them and win the election and get a comfortable majority in Parliament, then who knows? Maybe we will have a small little conservative counter-revolution in the UK. It would be very nice, of course. It would be very needed, to say the least. But Boris himself, I don't think that he has any kind of conservative...
What I found particularly funny was that Boris announced, I think about 2 weeks before he was appointed Prime Minister, although everyone in the know already knew that he will be the next Prime Minister. He said that, look, maybe we should be looking into creating free ports in Britain. One day after Boris Johnson is holding his first cabinet meeting as the newly appointed Prime Minister of Great Britain, the EU comes out with their newly updated list of blacklisted policies, which includes free ports. And I'm like, okay, that's a weird coincidence. But you know what else is a weird coincidence? The Hanseatic port of Hamburg, which is a free port in the European Union, but it just so happens that it's in Germany. So free ports are absolutely haram. But if they're in Germany, then it's suddenly Allah wills it that it's okay.
We have a lot of these coincidences. There was another when it came to the Brexit vote. Of course, I don't remember exactly the circumstances now, but it was something, I think, about Article 50, whether the Parliament was needed or not for it to be triggered. And I think a day or two before they were supposed to have a vote on it in the Parliament in the UK,
in the House of Commons.
In the House of Commons, the European Court of Justice came with some kind of verdict on the issue a day before they were supposed to vote, and you know, another strange coincidence. So yeah, we have a lot of them here in the EU.
Yeah, the reason I keep on mentioning these kinds of things is because I know that a lot of conservatives in Poland, and to a certain extent in Hungary as well, differ quite a lot from how I look at things, in the sense that you guys look a little bit more favorably to the European Union. I believe the European Union should be reformed via dismantlement. That's not a popular position amongst conservatives, and I keep on asking these things to try to understand why. I mean, you're all noticing what I'm noticing, yet for some reason most conservatives are still more Europhilic than they should be. Why is this the case?
Yeah, well, we had also a similar transformation in Italy with Salvini and with Marine Le Pen in France, where they dropped...
I don't count Marine Le Pen as a conservative, so...
No, that's true. But these former complete Eurosceptics, they... Either Marine Le Pen, after losing the election, she realized that her campaigning against the euro was probably stole some of her votes, and she adopted a more soft position on the matter. And Salvini also went from completely wanting to abolish the European Union to changing the European Union. This is also the same position that is being held by the Law and Justice Party here in Poland and also by Viktor Orban in Hungary.
The Law and Justice Party is consistent. They've always had this position.
Yes.
Let's take over the EU.
Yes, there was no change in that policy. My own position when it comes to this, I'm also deep down a huge supporter of some kind of European cooperation on a civilizational level. Our countries are too small to compete with massive superstates such as China and so on, and India in the future. I want to pool the European capacity and capabilities into some kind of common project. But how it looks like, whether the European Union as we know it today, if it needs to be completely dismantled instead of transformed. I mean, if it would be completely dismantled, I still expect something to be built from the ruins of it, not just leave it as ruins. But whether it first needs to be torn down and rebuilt, or whether you can just renovate it as a building, a little piece here and there, and with time we will have a completely new building. I'm not sure which way forward is the best.
Pretty much like you can't reform Islam without getting rid of Muhammad. You can't reform Marxism without getting rid of Marx. You can't reform the European Union without getting rid of the seeds of its own demise, which are built into the project, because it's built like the Soviet Union. Gorbachev couldn't reform the Soviet Union without dismantling it first.
Sure.
And then someone else came in and tries, and now Mr. Putin tries to rebuild it in some different fashion. He'll probably fail too. But at the very least, he starts from an understanding that, look, the old way didn't work. The European Union is built very similarly. I mean, in official propaganda, it's called a deficit of democracy. And by that, they mean there is no democracy. And again, I'm not a big fan of democracy. I'm not a Democrat, a small d Democrat. I don't think having a lot of democracy makes you really particularly good. I mean, yeah, sure, we can. But what about Switzerland? Yeah, what about California? Having a lot of democracy isn't particularly a recipe for good good governance.
Of course.
But having no democracy and pretending that you have...
When it comes to the issue with democracy, it's of course one of these taboo subjects that you're not allowed to ponder the question
of whether democracy is good.
Whether democracy is always good in every situation,
or whether universal suffrage is necessarily a good thing.
And absolutely. And these issues will become more and more questioned, I imagine, as the trajectory that we are on just continues, which means that all European nations have been going down since at least the 60s. I would say at least since 1914, since the First World War. While China, which is a dictatorship, of course, has been steadily rising since the late 70s. It's almost 50 years. Almost 50 years. And now, of course, people that will want to attack this position will go, oh, look, Mr. Starzyński here is attacking the foundations of democracy. He is lauding the Chinese communist dictatorship. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying that
in civilizational terms, we're doing something wrong, China is doing something right.
That's obvious to me.
It's just the record of history.
Yes.
No hate. It's just...
I, of course, prefer Europe over China. The European civilization over the Chinese civilization. I have a lot of respect for the East Asian spirit of collectivism, as in struggling together towards a united goal.
It's something that would never fit us.
It would never fit us. The European civilization is very individualistic. Europe as a continent was able to blossom just because how it was after the fall of the Roman Empire, with no single state being able to dominate the entire continent and forcing a uniform culture on it. Romania has its own culture, France has its own culture, Germany has its own culture, the UK has its own. And this is what I believe made Europe the continent it was between, say, the 14th and 19th or early 20th century, we had a good couple of centuries where we completely dominated the world in a military way, in an intellectual way, in a scientific way. Now the question is how can we get back to that? Because as I said, the trajectory has been clear for the last 50 years.
And for all the belly aching about more diversity, the diversity of Europe is slowly being dismantled rather than increased. I mean, the period that you described is probably the most diverse period of Europe, for sure, and there is a case to be made that Europe succeeded because of its diversity, and now we're moving into a direction where diversity is verboten.
And also this monoculture that they want to enforce here in
that's
Europe.
what I mean when I say the abolition of diversity.
Yes, this monoculture is a Creole type of culture where you mix Middle Eastern, North African and Sub-Saharan cultures just by taking so many of these people in. And at the same time, Europe is being flooded with American culture that reaches us by Hollywood and just celebrity culture in general. And this combination of the two, you can observe it in the suburbs of Stockholm, where many of these migrants, they aren't real Muslims in that way. They are the second generation, the third generation already born here, and they have absorbed a lot of American ghetto culture, Black American, Afro-American ghetto culture. And they are reproducing it in Paris, in Stockholm, in parts of Germany, in London as well, of course.
I've seen some of that in Slovenia. It was really funny to see, like 10-year-old black kids LARPing as Balkan gangsters. It was so fucking funny. And it's funny on one hand, but when you think about it on a civilizational scale, it's not particularly good even for the individuals themselves.
No, absolutely
because
not.
what is that kid's identity? He's
No,
definitely not a Serb, definitely not a Slovene, not exactly European, not exactly American, and definitely not African.
No, it's tragic, and
that individual is going to have a tough awakening 10 years from now when he'll be 20.
And
at age 10 it's funny, at age 20 it's not funny.
Sure, but this is the problem here in Europe. We don't have any respect for our domestic traditional cultures anymore. Either we go full in search for influences from south of the Mediterranean Sea or in the Middle East, or we go completely Hollywood. There are very few teenagers or young adults today which know, for example, the literary canons of their own country, the classical works from the 18th and 19th century from whether it's Germany or Sweden or France. And this just shows of how far we have fallen and in which crisis we are.
And we keep on going in the wrong direction because, if you want necessarily to draw inspiration from south of Mediterranean, there's always Ethiopia, which has a very, very strong and old culture. But we don't seem to draw from there, we draw from Libya. Which doesn't. If you want to go in the Middle East, there's always the old Persian tradition. I mean, it's a very acculturated and civilized empire to draw inspiration from there. But we keep on drawing from Lebanon, which doesn't have. It has a Hamas tradition. If you want America, there is always, the Deep South or the Northeast, which either the colonial tradition or the pre-colonial Puritan tradition. But we don't go there. We go full California, which doesn't.
That's true. That's true. We keep going for the lowest option.
Why do we keep on going in the wrong direction in that respect?
Well, of course, it's my conspiratorial self here, but it feels like we are being pushed in that direction by certain forces. This process of dumbing down or idiocracy or whatever you want to call it, it feels like there is definitely some kind of support for this project from influential circles. Right now, I'm very fascinated with following Miss Greta Thunberg and the support she is receiving by media, and this entire what is it called, Extinction Rebellion movement that also is spreading quite quickly in many countries.
Planet Greta again. I'm serious. That's how the propaganda ran in Germany in May. In May, I made a German tour, and
I can imagine. And I have to say, it was a couple of months, probably not even a full year, after this Greta Thunberg hysteria started. The Green parties did well across Europe, in of course not so much in our region.
In our region, not so much.
Yes, but
the Romanian Green Party got a grand total of 0.23.
Ah, well, I think ours got 0.5. So still
2 times
a little stronger. But I saw even in Italy, which never really had a Green Party, I think they went from 0.1 to 2.1 or something. Still small, but it's a massive increase percentage.
They got a lot in Germany, though.
In France, also the Green Party did very well.
And France didn't have at least in Germany, Die Grüne is an old traditional party.
True. Yeah.
But in France,
you're right. What did they get? 7-8%?
7 or 7 point something, yes. And they never usually get more than 2.
Yeah.
And 2 is already quite optimistic.
So yes, it's easy to see that once certain influential camps or forces come up with a new strategy, they put all the money they have behind it, all their resources, they have a very easy way of pushing these ideas, as long as the average person is being dumbed down, as we said earlier, by these...
herding idiots tends to be slightly easier than herding people who at least know a thing or two about how the world functions. That's definitely the case. Now, I usually avoid this kind of conspiratorial thinking for the simple reason that often I've been explained, and the record of history is pretty clear on that. One should avoid assuming conspiracy when stupidity tends to explain the same thing.
Sure.
And, Mr. Huxley sadly seems to have been proven right, more so than Mr. Orwell. We are in the brave new world in a way. I mean, this video is probably going to get, 2,000 views, maybe? Not because it's terrible, but because, it's a lot more attractive.
There is nobody twerking in the background.
Yes, there's nobody twerking. Yeah, probably if we were to get a twerker in the background, we might be getting more views. Yeah. So it is, in a way, the brave new world. With that said, with the Greta Thunberg, I was about to mention you this. Of course, they promoted heavily in Romania, too. And then they suddenly cancelled their publicity contracts because when they staged their first rally, nobody showed up.
Ah, that's nice.
Like 0.
That's nice.
And they suddenly the propaganda just disappeared overnight because nobody showed up. And
this Greta Thunberg phenomenon.
And I called their local organization. Hi, this is with the Freedom Alternative. I'd like to give you an interview. Do you happen to have some footage from the from the march? Because I heard you're having this huge march in Bucharest, and they're like, yeah, nobody showed up, and they hang up.
Here in Poland, it was
probably 100 people or something.
Well, there were. I don't remember if it was just one march or two. But at the zenith of this climate strike action, there was a march here in Warsaw, which did gather 1,000, 1,500 or something like that.
That's impressive, considering how marginal the issue is.
Yes, but then they tried to repeat a similar climate strike march in the city of Poznań, I think, 2 or 3 weeks later, and there was also a picture taken of 3 participants gathering with their signs. So yeah, it felt like it was a lot of young kids that they had seen on TV, that other kids are out marching in Germany and the Netherlands and so on. And well, if you can skip a day of school, it's automatically very attractive.
Yes. The same was happening.
Yeah, there was no deep foundation for it here.
Yeah, it happened in Germany. I mean, once the school year ended, suddenly the attendance at the marches reached the one in Poznan or the one in Bucharest, between 0 and 5 people, because once there is no more the motivation, the incentive.
But also, again, going back to the conspiratorial trail, it was interesting to see how some forces in Poland tried to push for our own Greta. They created a girl that was probably the same age as Greta. Her name was Inga, not a Polish name, but very Scandinavian as Greta. They gave her the same haircut with the braided hair, and instead of a school strike for the climate, she went on a vacation strike. So the summer break was cancelled for her, and instead of like the rest of the kids, going to the seaside or having a good vacation, summer vacation, she sat in front of our parliament for a week or two with a sign. And of course this fizzled out very quickly, but you could see that all the media was trying to push her for those 2 weeks.
Most of the support for the Greta Thunberg was entirely manufactured by the cathedral media. There was no, and there is no grassroots support for it. And even in Germany, maybe there was the influence of the having all of those propaganda, flashy things, make our planet Greta again and whatnot. But I was there during the election campaign, and I spoke to Green Party voters, and it's basically to the point where you have a significant minority, I would say about 10% of the voting population in Germany, who quite literally don't know what the Green Party is.
Yeah.
But they believe that, a decent person should vote for the Green Party.
It sounds nice.
It sounds nice. I mean, aren't you nice?
Yeah. I had...
Because I was trying to tell them, look, what is your opinion about the past pedophile, the pedophile
problems,
past...
yes. The Bandit Cohen issue.
The Green Party tends to have they had no idea what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Like, what pedophiles?
No, absolutely not.
They didn't even think that it was a right-wing conspiracy, because that's usually their comeback to that. No, they had no idea that the issue even existed.
Sure. A couple of years back, on election day in Sweden, I was discussing with a friend and his older sister about who we were going to vote for. I, of course, came clear that I'm voting for the Swedish Democrat, the anti-mass immigration party. And my friend's older sister told me that she would be voting for the Green Party. But the Green Party, exactly, in Sweden, it's not called the Green Party, it's called the Miljöpartiet, which translates as the Environmental Party.
Miljöpartiet de Gröna, so
yes. There is
the environmental
the green comes after, but the main name is called the Environment, or the Party of the Environment. And I was like, oh, so what do you like about their policies? No, I like nature. So if the name is protect nature, protect the environment, then
you're not anti-environment, aren't you? I mean, you don't want to start dumping a few thousand tons of gas.
Now I'm going into again dangerous ground to step on, especially when people they cut out 10 second fragments, but. When it comes to us conservatives being considered to be so negative to environment, there is this interesting phenomenon of eco-fascism, which is growing. For example, the shooter in New Zealand apparently was very strong on the ecology factor. Yeah. Previously, we had Ted Kaczynski, which had more technology-related issues, but. And by this, I'm not trying to in any way endorse some kind of eco-fascist ideas, but I'm just saying that if we don't want to lose people to these Green Party hysteria campaigns, it would be nice, because this is a very conservative standpoint in general, that we don't want chemicals that change the hormones, for example, on people in our clothes or in the food we eat or so on. So I think it would be a good idea for us to counter the Green Party by trying to push a little more against or on the issue of clean water, clean air, and no chemical poison in our daily life. So
yes, but that effort is made particularly difficult given that a significant portion of the so-called green agenda is based on outright lies, and the portions that are not lies, they're addressed with policies that would inhibit progress. Yeah. So, you're concerned with pollution. Great, I'm concerned with pollution too. Let's go full nuclear. Oh, but they're all against nuclear. You're concerned with the pollution of our waters. Fantastic. Let's create tanks that are better. Oh, but no, because those are created from rare materials that exploit Africans. And I'm like, are you against Africans? I mean, really?
No, of course, these people, they are against everything. This is the problem.
Or we're overusing our agricultural land in Europe. And I'm like, fine, let's open the markets to Africa because we can buy cheap food from Africa and the Africans will get better, so they'll stay there. And we'll get much cheaper and equally good or even better food without subsidizing it via the CAP.
Yeah.
But then the Green Party is against that too. So that makes it particularly difficult, because I understand what you mean when you say that it is a fundamentally conservative point. Yeah, the conservationist movement, it's in the name, it's conservative.
Yes.
But I believe there is a difference between being conservationist and being concerned with preserving nature and being a green activist.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree.
They're just two different planets.
The only way for this forward is to improve our living conditions by improving technology and technological solutions. For example, nuclear energy, excellent, but fusion energy, even better. Let's spend more money on research into those technologies that don't exist yet, but are very promising and very difficult. I was earlier talking about the issue with China, that are starting to outcompete us in many scientific fields. The only way for Europe and also the US in general, Western civilization, I'm including Canada, I'm including Australia, I'm including large parts of even Latin America, we need to get our brightest minds to really study these issues, and we need money being put in,
and some of that,
but also culture needs to change.
Some of that money is being siphoned again on useless technology. I mean, we're not necessarily spending, but definitely misallocating resources into subsidizing electric cars, which are terrible. They're inferior technologically in every single respect. And overall, as environmental impact, they're equal or worse with the traditional ones. So we're going backwards technologically.
Especially as long as the electricity that they run on is still generated by, for example, coal power or something else.
That and the manufacturing process. I mean, battery disposal is a very polluting activity.
Absolutely.
So you may feel clean within the city, but 500 kilometers away from the city is a much more dangerous dump than it would have been otherwise. So,
completely agree.
We're going backwards technologies, and same with the wind thing.
Yeah.
Most recent, I think it was in Germany, I was reading a piece of news where they're dismantling a whole highway that was made, solar and environmentally friendly. And of course, at the time, there were assholes like me who said that ain't gonna work. And of course, it didn't work.
Well, this attitude that they have, that we need to, for example, they say that we need a zero growth policy or something of the sort.
Yeah, that's a nice way of saying economic Marxism.
For me, it was best exemplified by this, what is it called? I don't remember, the Save the World Day or whatever, the day where people are supposed to turn off their lights in their apartments.
Oh yeah,
World
the Earth Day.
Earth Day.
Earth Day, yeah.
Earth Day.
I got a lot of flack in it's one of my first videos in English. It's called Earth Day, a spectacle of stupidity.
Yes.
And of course it's with the famous picture, North Korea, South Korea. There's Earth Hour.
Earth Hour, that's right.
Back in communism in Romania, we used to celebrate Earth Hour every single day for about 7 hours a day.
Yeah, apparently rolling blackouts is the future. It's the best thing we can. No, but it really encapsulates the idea that not that we should develop certain technologies or advance certain issues. We should regress. We should stop using energy. We should stop producing materials. We should stop having babies. We should. Now we have Prince Harry coming out saying, "I will only have 2 children because I don't want to ruin the earth." While Prince William has 3. So basically, he's saying that his brother is not taking responsibility, that he's destroying the world. So unfortunately, this craze it's growing, it's developing.
The thing is that these kinds of and again, I really don't think, because I don't have enough evidence to claim that it's intentional. But there's definitely an idiosyncrasy there. And these kinds of idiosyncrasies will necessarily have to give rise to, not necessarily dangerous, I don't regard them as dangerous, but definitely quasi-revolutionary type of movements, because enough individuals are noticing and will notice within the next 20 years that, look, on one hand you're telling me not to have babies, but then you're filling my country with individuals,
other people's babies.
Yeah, with other people's babies from countries that have a birth rate 7 times higher than most countries of Europe.
Yeah.
Or 5 times higher. I mean, I think Niger has like 8.3.
Yeah, they have the
Poland
world record.
is what, 1.6, and most of Europe is 1.3, 1.4, except Germany, which is even lower than that. But then Germany is a mental disorder.
But then we have France at 1.93, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but how many of them are French?
Yeah, it's not a lot of Guillaumes being born.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's racist to point the question, but to ask the question. But one has to ask the question.
Of course.
And while it may not be constitutional for French people to ask it, we're not French, so we're going to ask the question anyway.
Yeah.
And again, that wouldn't be such a terrible problem if, at the very least, we were to be honest about it. But the fact that the discussion is being siphoned out, either through outright censorship or through various bullying, that's not a recipe for social tranquility and peace over the next 20 years, because you can't have a civilization with someone else's babies.
And coming back to the issue of migration and these boats faring across the Mediterranean, now again with this new initiative by the 14 countries that are supposed to take quotas for every boat that lands in Italy, their idea is that Italy gets to keep some, but this coalition of the 14, they take the rest. But Macron was also honest, and he said that he doesn't see a future in which other EU member states will be able to say no to this responsibility, as he phrased it, without getting their funds from the EU taken as revenge. So of course he wants to force this system on us as well. But as you mentioned, Niger, eight babies per woman or something. I was looking the other day on these projections for population growth, and I was looking at mega cities for 2050, 2070, and 2090, I think. And India will come strong. India will have 4 or 5 of these cities with 45-50 million. But then you have projected mega cities which are very unexpected today. Congo-Kinshasa, 50 million. I don't even remember what
Mogadishu, it's going to have to be pretty big.
Mogadishu, huge. I don't even remember what the city is called, but the capital of Malawi. 29 million, I think, or something like that.
The capital of Nigeria is going to have to be Nairobi. It's going to have to be at least triple the size it is now, and it's already huge.
Nigeria is supposed to be 900 million by the end of the century. So
it's probably not going to be 900 million.
No. This is where the Malthusian trap, I guess, still exists.
Let's not forget that in the 70s there was this thing that, Bangladesh will be bigger than the United States population-wise by 2010. 2010 was 10 years ago. Bangladesh is still like 6 or 7 times smaller than the United States. Because, just because, and it's true, in 1970 the fertility rate in Bangladesh was 9.1, but today is smaller than Poland. Things do change over decades. I don't expect Niger to keep on maintaining 8.2 that they do have now. I suspect they'll drop.
It will drop for sure. But it's also, we can be certain that it won't drop to 1.3 or 1.2.
Or even if it does, the standard of living, this is another aspect that most people don't know. And I know because I've just been to Africa, just a few months ago in February. The standard of living in Africa is quite good. This is what people don't realize. I mean, when people think about Ethiopia, for instance, they're thinking about that very old, 50 years old picture with the dehydrated child in the middle of the desert starving to death. That picture was taken more than 50 years ago, and it was rare in Ethiopia then. Today it's impossible. They have fucking skyscrapers in Addis Ababa.
Great roads.
Great roads. And I'm planning a tour to Ethiopia next year. It's the standard of living kept on increasing, even in very poor countries like Zimbabwe. I spent more than a week in Zimbabwe, and yes, it's pretty bad, but it's nowhere near as bad as it used to be 10 years ago, and nowhere near as bad as it was 60 years ago. Even with all of the troubles that they've been through, the life expectancy grew, standard of living kept on growing, and it's not going to go backwards that much.
No, I mean, if we look at GDP growth in those countries, it's still 7-8% in many of those countries. Of course, the problem is that the population growth is also high. So
Zimbabwe it isn't. I mean,
okay, sure. There are exceptions, but yeah, some of the growth is being the effects are being reduced by GDP per capita not growing as much because of the high.
And the reason I'm mentioning all of this is because I'm hoping enough people will listen and start making the case. For instance, because one way I found a lot of success lately in arguing against mass migration, I'm like, look. Zimbabwe is a country the size of Germany or higher, but with 12 million people. What do you mean they don't have room in Zimbabwe and they have to come to Europe? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
How about we invest there with their local force? We make some money, they make some money, everyone is better off. Why do they all have to come here?
No, absolutely. No, this is unfortunately a position that is quite common in Sweden, that we need to bring these people here to Europe because either they will starve or die, or they will just suffer throughout their short lives in Africa.
That was just no longer true.
And
it might have been true 60 years ago.
It's not true, and B, it's not possible, because if you want to take in 500 million people to Europe from Africa, there is no way that you can keep the standards of living in Europe at the same level as they are today.
For anyone,
yeah. So going back to the main point I wanted to make is that the population in Africa will continue to grow, probably not to the year 2100, but for the next 20-25 years it will still grow a lot. And the more migration that is allowed to Europe, another thing that people don't realize, all of these people have phones, smartphones with internet. It's very easy to let your family and friends in your local village back in Africa to inform them that, yes, I made it across to France. It was a little expensive. It took me a couple of weeks of waiting in Libya. It wasn't very easy, but now I'm in France, and I will soon have citizen or at least permanent residency, and I will be on the roll for some nice benefits. Yep. Life is good. Life is good.
Yeah.
Come on over.
Also, a lot of the individuals who advocate for this don't realize just how expensive it is to get from Niger, for instance, all the way to France. And at the same time, they also don't realize that most of the people who can afford to pay those expensive journeys are also not exactly the people who actually need the help the most.
Yeah, they aren't the ones threatened by famine. That's
for sure.
That's for certain.
For sure, because I've gotten the chance to see a little bit up close how the elite in Zimbabwe lives. Let's say they live better than most people in Europe.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. I won't go into further detail, although I will once I shut down the camera.
Also, when it comes to another argument that is often made in Sweden is that we need to send out all these patrol boats to comb through every square mile of the Mediterranean Sea to save as many lives as possible.
Why?
The more people we take in, the more boats will set out. The more boats that set out, the more people will drown. The most efficient policy is the no way, the Australian no way policy. If you try to
Australia's hardline conservative far-right policy on immigration saved more migrants than any left-wing pro-immigration policy.
And Salvini's attempt in Italy, which has lowered the numbers of migrant boats setting out, is also the most successful in saving lives. Much more successful than all of these NGOs active in the Mediterranean
Or the Spanish
Sea.
policy, which basically is everyone can... But at least Spain has a territorial border with Morocco, which was funny because I wanted to study this December in my Moroccan tour, but I'm not going to do it because physically I cannot do it anymore. Not this year. But it was really funny. At some point, the Moroccan police was protecting the Spanish border. The Spaniards were like, let them all in. And the Moroccans were like, no, just no.
It won't work.
No, it's not. That's not how reality works.
Yeah.
You gotta understand that.
Yeah, sometimes we as Europeans need a reality check from some of these nations that...
Speaking of which, in France now the police is begging, and they're getting some of Moroccan police officers to police the Moroccan criminals in France. And believe it or not, they're very effective at it. And then the Moroccan police officers are like, but we cut them all for you. Why are you letting them loose? I mean, we're thinking about deporting them back home and, putting into...
The Moroccan criminals are a very interesting case. Of course, they are very famous in the Netherlands, where they have made a large impact on the local community.
And because of the Geert Wilders issue.
Oh yes, but also with the Moroccans, they were a concern in Sweden for around 2-3 years, around 4 or 5 years ago. They aren't that much of an issue today. But these were Moroccan homeless children, aged 15 to 20 maybe, who had lived on the streets of Spain for 2-3 years, and then all of a sudden a couple of them showed up in Sweden and Stockholm, and they sent the word back, because they also have phones with internet, that Sweden is a wonderful country for us. So a couple of hundred of them moved to Stockholm, where they were now homeless on the streets of Stockholm. Sweden offered them shelters, home, foster care, whatever. Didn't want it. They prefer to live around the central station of Stockholm. They were famous for pickpocketing and sexual assaults. After a while, the situation around the central station got so out of hand that 3 of the football hooligan groups of the 3 local clubs in Stockholm, they got together and with some hardcore nationalists formed a citizens militia of around 100-150 men. And they went to the central station and they attacked these youths. Of course, it was a huge scandal in Swedish press, but the issue came out for the public, and then local politicians were also starting to say that we need to negotiate with Morocco, and they signed some kind of deal, and Morocco took most of them back. So today it's not a huge issue, but for a year, 2 or 3. Just interesting to see how these flows. They come out of nowhere. They appear. They can be there for a couple of years, and then if you're lucky, they can also disappear.
Yeah. Every time you mention this, you're being called a racist. By that standard, I guess the female president of Ethiopia is the biggest racist of all, because she went to Sebastian Kurz, the Chancellor of Austria, and said, "Look, if by any chance you arrest an Ethiopian that is here in Austria illegally, please, by all means, send it back, because we need all of the workforce that we can muster.
Criminal or not, we'll find a job for him."
The economic growth in Ethiopia is outstripping the population growth, and we just need a lot of workers, and we're sick and tired of all of them leaving to live on the dole in Europe instead of working at home where there are jobs, and most of them are actually pretty well paid. Not just by local standards, but by global standards. They're not poor. That's what I keep on trying to tell people. They're not poor. Right. What's going to happen in the next year? So it's the elections, and then what? Because I presume we're going to meet again next year.
I think so too. Well, here in Poland...
Maybe next time in Romania.
I hope so. I'm still very sad about the fact that I wasn't able to make it to the 3 Seas Initiative Summit last year in Romania.
Next year is in Estonia.
Yeah, it will be hard. But I think there might actually be a good air connection for me here from Warsaw.
Oh yeah, there is a direct flight.
Yeah, and I think it's not even that expensive. And I
think
it
is. It's later or tomorrow, and it's very expensive. I've already looked for this year. Going me with my partner from the Romanian language, it costs us about 900 euros with all housing, transport, everything.
Yeah.
To go to Estonia, it's going to cost us 900 euros just for us to get there and come back.
Yeah.
With one layover here in Warsaw.
We're waiting for Rail Baltic, of course, to hopefully give us another 8-9 years, and maybe it will be feasible to go by train to the Baltic states for us Poles. But anyway, getting back to the schedule, parliamentary elections probably early October, and then we have presidential elections also here in Poland in May next year. And this will close the hectic electoral season, which started with local elections last fall, European Parliament elections this spring, parliamentary elections this fall, and presidential elections early next year.
Crazy schedule in Romania as well. Almost similar, yes.
So after that, at least we'll have a good 3 years without any elections, and there will be some time to...
New term for Mr. Duda?
It looks so. It does look so. His popularity has diminished a little bit. I think it went down from around 54 to maybe 50%, or from 50% to 47, depending on what poll you're looking at. Mateusz Morawiecki, for the first time ever, passed him in one of these highest approval rating polls recently. Hard to say whether it's just that one poll or if it's a trend, but his popular support is still high enough to defeat the only candidate that is likely, which is Donald Tusk, once he finishes his term as president of the European Council by the end of this year. As I said, presidential elections in May, so we'll have a couple of months.
He will run, he will lose, and then get another EU job. Because that usually tends to be the trend, right? When you lose elections at home, you get promoted in the EU apparatus.
That is most likely. But I would give Tusk, or if they will find somebody else to run for president, but it doesn't really look like
Mayor of Warszawa?
Mayor of Warszawa could be a candidate, but to be honest, apart from him, and still not even him actually, I think Tusk is the only one they can go for. And I would give Tusk maybe 20% chance and Duda 80%.
At winning.
At winning. So it does look like another term. Of course, for us Poles it's extremely important because Tusk as president would block any kind of
geopolitical initiative,
any kind of new legislation that the Law and Justice Party is trying to pass. So yes, we keep our fingers crossed for some stability in this country, because this is something that we have been lacking historically. So 8 years in power by the Law and Justice Party with a president who is willing to cooperate with the government would make it much easier for us to take strategic decisions and keep with them and stay with them. So we hope for that. What else? I guess that's it for Poland. And then when it comes to Europe, Brexit will still be the huge issue by the end of this year. The European Parliament or the EU budget negotiations next year will also be quite important. And then finally, EU reform, because as I said earlier, we have been waiting coalition talks in Germany, European Parliament elections. Now with Brexit, whatever way it goes, I feel that von der Leyen, Macron, and AKK, Miss Merkel's replacement, they will try something. Exactly what, I'm not sure. But
I don't think they know either at this point.
Very possible, but I feel that after Brexit they know that things can't continue as they are right now, and probably they're going to take the next step, and the chances are high that by taking that next step they will actually ruin something quite significantly. So yes, turbulent years ahead. This is my guess. The next 2-3 years could be very turbulent.
Hopefully we get to meet at the Intermarium summit next year.
I hope so. I really want to go.
And we're going to compare this segment with how things have been going till the next, which will probably going to be June 2020.
I was actually thinking about this comparison from when we met a year ago and we were discussing, I remember we were discussing Spain, which looked quite promising then, that Ciudadanos and Vox were growing, and now we
Vox grew much more than we expected. But not nowhere near enough to actually change things.
Yes, and now the socialists are growing.
Yes, but something else happened. The hard left dropped, like almost entirely.
Oh, sure.
That was unexpected.
And they can't come to agreement with the Podemos, and the socialists are unable to form government at the moment.
Yes, because Podemos is so hard left that even Partido Socialista Obrero Español is like, no, you guys are insane. That's not how the world works. That's basically the argument that they're having now. These socialists are like, look, that has been tried. It doesn't work. It's not how, and of course the Podemos cannot be.
But
you can't reason with those people.
No. But it will be interesting to follow us also what continues to happen in Spain.
Right. Follow him on @BasedPoland.
Based Poland on Twitter.
On Twitter. A lot of agitation and propaganda from Adam there.
My specialty.
Yep. And I guess see you next year.
Definitely. Thanks for another meeting.
Thanks a lot for coming to my show. And see you all pretty soon. Cheers.